Just give me 1 second, folks. There's a couple people waiting, and for whatever reason, I can't add them to the call. I'm going to jump off and jump back on. All right, I just realized I was muted. All right, welcome back, everybody. My apologies. I am recording this. Why don't we start with the joint utilities and PE's comments on blocks 3 and 4, the DER and load forecast. Any initial reactions, unless, of course, Jacob or Dave, if you want to run through your comments, you're more than welcome to do so.
Yeah, I mean, we put them out there, so if people are interested in us walking them through it, you know, I can have the capacity planning team hop on it, not to put them walk through it, but
right.
Obviously, you know, we put them out there, so open to any questions.
Okay, all right. Well, why don't we start with the joint utilities? You don't have to call those folks just yet. Any initial feedback, reactions, comments, concerns?
Sorry, Judge, stakeholder reactions to joint utility comments?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Happy to provide some, and we highlighted this in our reply comments, so I won't get too into the weeds here. Though I think generally what the utilities put forth made sense, but just looking back at our comments, what we wanted to note is that we take a slightly different view on how EV and electrification forecasting kind of comes into play here. I think the utilities had categorized that only within the load forecasting section. We think there's a significant impact in the DER forecasts when it comes to the relationship of electric vehicles and electrification. These loads can already and will increasingly be able to be flexible and therefore can be responsive to grid conditions, and therefore the capabilities provided by things like electric vehicles, by electrification resources, by smart inverters, all of these things need to be included within the way that utilities conduct their DER forecasting processes. That is the one distinction I wanted to call out, or a viewpoint where we may differ. Obviously, happy to try to come to alignment on that, and happy for utility folks to clarify if I'm misinterpreting their position.
Yeah, I can follow up. Eli and Ethan and team, feel free to hop in if I miss anything. I don't think we're entirely misaligned on that perspective. I think what we are trying to highlight is at a base level, these are loads to the system that can be flexible and responsive if customers are electing to participate in different programs offered to them in that space. And so I think as we think about it, if customers are participating in those types of programs, those programs would be reflected in that way in terms of a more DER type way than purely load, because they would be flexible in that perspective. But at a base level, they are functionally kind of load at the system. It's only those, when customers elect to participate, right? So I have an EV right now. My EV is nothing but a load to the system, because it's just what it is right now. And so it's important to be able to recognize that that at a base level that they are loads, and it's really when customers have that choice to elect to participate in some types of those programs, that would then be kind of reflected within forecasting as more of a DER type resource than purely load, if that makes sense. So I think we're in agreement of like those resources can be flexible and responsive, and I think when they would be reflected that way. We're just trying to acknowledge that at a base level, they are, intrinsically load.
Okay. I agree with that last piece. And so just to clarify, it sounds like the utilities are in agreement with the concept that these types of loads can be flexible, and therefore you're saying that when they are, enrolled in such programs that allow them to provide flexibility, that will be reflected in the way utilities do DER forecasting. Because I think that's the key, is that the DER forecasting process will bake in various assumptions. And one of those key assumptions will just need to reflect the impact that EV and electrified loads can have within grid planning. So are you saying that will, like, those capabilities will actually be reflected in the DER forecasting process? Because I think that's the key.
Yeah, and again, the capacity planning team can chime in here. My initial thought is to the level and magnitude, duration, time of day that those resources can participate as DERs, right? Just thinking as, say, V2G, for example. As they are able to participate and what that actually looks like that the utilities can reliably depend on and forecast towards, I think the thought there is in that kind of future view that, that would be incorporated. But again, that's kind of where we're thinking, again, as long as it's understanding what magnitude, what actual capabilities that those resources have that then the utilities can then depend on.
Thanks, Jacob.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it sounds like at least you two are pretty much on the same page.
I think largely I'm seeing some other stakeholders with raised hands, and
Sure.
I'm definitely curious to hear the
All right,
points.
I'm not trying to hem you in right now, so I'm just Mr. Cathan and then Jorge.
All right, I'm generally in agreement with what Jacob and Eli have been discussing. I just wanted to probe a little bit more onto the point I think Eli was trying to, was moving down on, was the issue. Understand that they will, once you see manage, charging or V2G and that type of stuff. So I guess my question is, we're separately going to be talking about DER forecasting, but when will that shift over? When, what will be that shift? Is it only when you see, some actions taken by a weave grid or whatever in your systems? Or, and what type of DER forecasting will you do once it shifts over from, the EVs on your system and then and moving over? And then the second thing I wanted to ask, which was a broader question, will in your load forecasting, will there be a forecast of EV adoption, such that that will affect, how much load there is on any particular circuit or feeder or whatever?
So I will take an initial response and again defer to the team to add in kind of more clarity. Looking, David, kind of to your first question, I think we already have some pilots going in terms of load management, working with WeGrid and doing a load management study pilot with regards to EVs. So some of that's already kind of in motion as we're starting to understand some of those programs and looking to continue to kind of grow and learn in some of those understandings. As to your second question, I believe that outlined in the comments was that there would be both, a focus on fleet PNB and having some of those discussions in terms of that future view, as well as incorporating a future EV adoption forecast scenario. Just looking back at our comments, I see that as kind of the second bullet in EV. So I think that bullet kind of, respond that yes, we are looking to incorporate that into the forecast. I'll also defer to Ethan or anyone else from the team if there's any additional items they want to add.
All right, I guess you nailed it. Jorge.
It did. So Jacob, let me probe. You say reliably depend. So what is that? How do you define that? How can we help you out with you be able to reliably depend on that DER?
Yeah, and again, happy to allow the capacity planning team to kind of chime in here on their perspective. I'll say initial thought is obviously, we have to be able to understand what the resources, can provide to the grid and to the system, and that the utilities, in our forecasting can, expect and anticipate that resource will, respond when, necessary and when called upon, to address any of, the load on the grid and provide that service that they're looking for. So I think at a high level, that's kind of what we view there.
So, okay. So would you get that dependability through a penalty established in a contract? How let's say somebody doesn't show up. So what will happen?
I don't know, right? That you're going kind of into a direction that I'm not as familiar with. Certainly, willing to have further discussions on it, but that's just an area specifically kind of getting into those level of agreements and details that I'm just personally not familiar with.
Yeah, but I think that may be the bottom line, right? Because if you are truly going to incorporate this into your planning, full incorporation of these resources into your planning, you need to make sure that they're going to be there when they're going to be called when you call them, right? So will that be through direct control of the asset? Will that be through penalties in a contract? I think the methodology, and listen, I am empathetic, right? Because I think that Ethan has mentioned this a couple of times. At the end of the day, you are the ones charged with the reliability of the grid, right? So what it is that they could do so we can put this forward, because if not, I'm going to hear what I have been hearing for the past 10 years. Yeah, we know that these guys are out there, but I don't have any reassurances that they will act when they're called upon. So I cannot count on them. So I got to do other things, right, to ensure that the system stays reliable.
All right, thank you, sir. I'm sorry, Mr. Cathan, did Ethan answer, or did Jacob sufficiently answer your question? I apologize for not going back to you, sir.
Sufficiently.
All right, thank you, sir. All right, Mr. Ruczynski.
Yes, good afternoon. I had two major questions on this, at least on your matrix, where you say distributed generation. This is primarily considered to be PV. And yet last year we had agreed on a wide range of distributed resources. And in fact, that box is what has a whole lot of things in it. So you're summarily out of hand saying PV is the only thing that we'll consider when we know that there are other resources that are out there. So that's my first observation. The second one, in dealing with your matrix, you talk about time horizon sufficiently long, and you say, well, we're going to move to a long-term distribution system planning process. It envisions a long-term distribution system planning process. But what is that long term that you're proposing? It's not there. I mean, the words sound good, but there's no substance there, at least that I see. So those are the two major questions that I have.
I saw Kevin raised his hand. I don't know if he was raising to answer the first question or.
Yeah, I was trying to jump in on the first question. So I think calling out PV there was not intended to be to exclude any other distributed generation. It was called out to identify how it's primarily manifested itself on the grid as we've seen it. The vast majority of the distributed generation that we've seen interconnect has been photovoltaics. So that was the only intention of it, was not trying to be exclusive to only PV. It was just an observation in what we've seen on the system.
So you're still in agreement that that's a usable list for everyone to work with? The DER list that's in box 3.
Yeah, I don't see why not.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that box, Paul, that Kevin and you all are talking about was the DG bullet specific within kind of the broad DER list. So I don't think we were trying to, as Kevin outlined, trying to capture solar is the only DER, but just that specific piece.
Well, you know, you have others, you have wind, you have other DERs, and so that kind of concerns me, the way that was presented. And as I said, the second one is the time horizon. You want to move to a long term, but that doesn't say anything. Just says we're going to do a long-term analysis. That to me is very nebulous.
Yeah, I think, you know, as we had talked about the long-term analysis, we've largely been keeping it broad, recognizing different utilities have different planning horizons, or planning cycles, I should say, not horizons. And so as you talk about what specifically is the long-term for each of those, you know, it's going to vary. So, you know, we were just kind of continuing to keep that flexibility in there for the different utilities.
Well, recognizing that utilities are different, and you represent, I guess, 3 of them, wouldn't it be better if you put in a stratified long-term planning horizon that each one of you are thinking of doing? I mean, instead of making these broad statements that really don't mean anything, at least to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think at a broad level, you know, beyond 10 years is what we're looking at in terms of that future process, in terms of the time horizon.
But for the sake of this planning, what are you looking at?
This is not a hearing. Paul, I did ask you what input you would like after you said you would like to give input. You had ideas of what input you would get, and then you said you would not tell us what kind of input you would give. This is not a hearing. There is no need to hold my people's feet to the fire. Happy holidays.
I don't view this as a hearing. Matter of fact, I'm not a lawyer. So having said that, I would, you know, I and others would like to see as much specificity as we can in what's being proposed. Instead, I see very broad statements made that do not deal with the subject. So, you know, and I can make those statements till the cows come home. So, you know, I'm putting you on the spot on this deliberately because you made the statement in here, you're going to do long-term analysis. So what does that mean?
Yeah, well, here, let me jump in. Jacob, does that just, by long-term analysis, are you intending that Delmarva, PHI, or Pepco and BGE, their long-term analysis would be based on whatever their 10, 12, 15-year long-term horizon is? Was that the intent?
I think so, if I'm understanding kind of what you're saying.
I think Mr. Rachinsky is trying to get, you know, does long-term analysis, does that match up with what we've discussed in terms of the planning horizons for the utilities?
I think so. And I mean, I think as you look towards the straw proposal that we put, you know, that was looking at kind of that long-term horizon, having that longer future view to align with the policy goal. So I think it is matching with what you're laying out there, Judge.
Okay. Well, and I know I'm not referring to the straw man. I was kind of going back to what we talked about in the time horizons for block one. Does that help you, Mr. Verchinsky, at least answer where they're coming from in terms of what long-term means?
To a small extent, I guess I would say. Okay, thank you.
I would just like to point out that the long-term analysis in all caps from the straw man, which Mr. Verchinsky opposed, was designed to, asked to be taken off the record, was designed to contain what any utility, and recognizing utility diversity, may have as its current long-term analysis and where it's moving to. It is intentionally vague in order to allow for flexibility for individual utility implementation. Exelon is different than SMECO. BG&E is different than PEPCO. DPL is different than PEPCO. We did that intentionally not to create confusion, but to allow for flexibility for utility implementation of the distribution system planning and for stakeholder engagement opportunities.
But I, as a stakeholder, it would create confusion because there's no understanding of what this is. And
it's defined in the straw man.
It's defined in your straw man, but it's not defined in here in your responses to the JADE process.
So Ethan, let me ask you this. Is it fair to say that some of these positions where you're going in the future refer back to the straw man? Is that
yes,
fair to
we
say?
will continue to refer back to the straw man.
Okay. Maybe that's where the confusion lies. It wasn't clear that that's what you were doing. I'm not saying that is the case, but maybe that's the issue.
We would appreciate that. Thank you, sir.
But again, that's just me. Mr. Verchinsky, before I let you go,
Sure.
In terms of the box 3, the DG, the distributed generation, are you wanting to see that kind of more specific in terms of exactly what they were talking about? I mean, we could put additional bullets in there if you want to be more specific, or
Well,
if that's what you're proposing.
yeah, well, in the response that I gave, I basically went back to last year, and what my understanding was that everybody had agreed to that list. I see no reason why the utilities can't agree to that list, especially since they were part of that discussion. So, kind of that's where I'm coming from. And the addition that David made, which is really dealing with utility demand management, which we think should also go in that particular box. I tried to stratify it by categories. Doesn't have to be. It could be a listing. But I think we need to know what those buckets are going to be, what the considerations will be in the forecast. And if they're just talking about PVs, we're missing the boat here.
Sure, understood. And when you refer back to last year, I obviously, either fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, I wasn't around for those discussions. So to the extent that there was an agreement, that's great. If somebody could let me know what was agreed to, that'd be even better. And Jacob, I mean, do utilities have, are you guys still on board with whatever was agreed to in terms of this list of DGs?
I also, fortunately or unfortunately, was not on board of phase 1, so I will defer that to Ethan or the rest of the team.
Okay.
Yes, we are absolutely. The language in that seems to be causing confusion is that this is primarily considered to be PV. is
Right.
based on our experience with what is happening on our system and was meant to be educational and illustrative.
Okay, excellent. All right. And Ethan, is that something that the list that was agreed to, or Mr. Brzezinski, if one of you could shoot that to me, maybe I just throw a footnote in the report so everybody knows what we're talking about. So we're clear. All right. Mr. Bartlett and then Mr. Cathan.
Yeah, thanks, Judge. And I just want to go back to this question of things that I thought we had settled. I thought, Judge, you gave what were specific to a certain degree and flexible definitions of the three timing horizons that we had discussed originally. There's the short-term one that's like 1 to 3 years. There's or maybe it was a little more, maybe it was 1 to 4. Then there's a 5 to 6 midterm, and then there was a longer term, which is out wherever the utilities choose to put it, somewhere between in 10 and 15 years, right? For example, I thought that way back when we had agreed in principle to those clear three different components of the planning process, but with the flexibility that Ethan and Jacob and everybody absolutely need. So I guess my question is, have we agreed or haven't we? Because if we have, then it would be great to nail that down and all be using the same thinking. And if we haven't, I guess we should.
My thought was we were okay with the the horizons as they had been presented, at least in terms of box one, as the time horizons are feeding into the utilities projections. I know there are some folks that wanted longer planning periods than what the utilities currently use, but does that sound about right? Anybody? Go ahead, Mr. Bartlett.
Oh, yeah, maybe it could be, maybe the latter category could be at least 10 or something like that. But again, both having a defined category and having flexibility, which is what the utilities appropriately are saying they need. I mean, but if we can just nail something down there, then, we're all kind of talking about the same things rather than having the discussion again of what do we actually mean.
Sure. Yeah, and I think some of the confusion was, at least I don't know if it was referenced in the joint utilities comments that they were referring back to the straw man, but at least that'll help me move going forward. Does anybody have any other understandings of the time horizon? Yes, Eli.
Yeah, I think that sounds right. I would want to double check
Sure,
some
absolutely.
notes I jotted down there. But I did, I think Al is bringing up a good point, and this comes back to something that I think Al might have said earlier on in the call. I reread the order that relaunched this phase of the DSP work group, and the order states that all recommendations should be made with the expectation that the commission's next step after receiving the final report, the April 30th report, will be to resolve any non-consensus issues and direct the work group to begin drafting regulations. And so I guess my concern, and building off of Al's comment, is that it seems to be a little bit unclear kind of where the work group has landed in terms of the time horizons recommendations, or in terms of recommendations related to the previous boxes that we've already discussed in general. And so my concern is that if we get to a point where this work group isn't making recommendations, or doesn't have clear, if we just don't have clear recommendations to make to the commission in the April report, it will be difficult to follow the commission's guidance and develop draft regulations if we don't have these recommendations. And so I'm wondering if we just need, it just comes down to more, it might be more process, it might be, more sharing of comments after the fact, to, weigh in on whether we did achieve consensus during this meeting or what were the recommendations following the meeting. So I'm just wondering if to help facilitate this work group coming up with clear recommendations in the April report, we just need some type of and I think, Judge, your emails that follow each meeting have started to do this, but they don't quite get to the level of this is the work group's recommendation, or some folks recommend this, some folks recommend this, and here's where the consensus is or where there's non-consensus. That is just one element that I'm wondering if we are able to get a little bit sharper on as a work group, we will be able to come into these discussions understanding where the work group landed, and that will allow us to be more productive. And then we can look at Jade and say, we have recommendations on boxes 1 through 6, but the recommendations lack on box 4. Or, I think it will just allow us to be a little bit more productive and fruitful in these conversations. And I know I'm going back to overarching process, but I'm hopeful that things like that would help resolve, lack of clarity around where we landed on topic X or whatever. Just a thought that is I've been trying to figure out how to articulate.
Okay, that's fair, and I can certainly try and provide something that's a little more detailed for what we've covered so far. All right, Jacob, before I go to Mr. Cathan, to follow up on, I think, what Jorge was talking about in terms of how you hold certain generators hold their feet to the fire in terms of a penalty, direct control, things of that nature. Is that something the utilities can, huddle up and come back with in terms of how that issue might be addressed?
Yeah, I can take it back
All
with
right.
the team to discuss.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah, I guess based on Jorge's comments, it sounded like it's kind of been a ongoing issue. So yeah, if you could huddle with that, I would appreciate it. Mr. Cathan.
Actually drill down and apologize, Ethan, if I'm going to be asking some very specific questions. But one of the questions is related to the joint utilities and the boxes. And in particular, it's not granularity of location, but granularity of load. And I see that in the load forecast, there'll be granularity of load impact by type will be in the load forecast. And the question is, could you provide a little bit more information on, because it's not included into the DG or storage, boxes on, what the forecast of what will be the load associated with that. So are you saying that's part of load forecasting, or is it going to be separate and then fed into load forecast? I know that's a very detailed question, but just I'm curious on how these things match. And I have 2 other questions, but that's the first one.
I know you kind of referenced Ethan there, but I'm not sure I fully understand the question. I know you referenced the sufficient granularity listed under load forecast.
Right.
But I'm not sure I fully understand what the question was.
All right. So basically, the list of forecast items in the future are basically just the contribution of installed DG and by substation and feeder, but it's not specifying what is going to be the load of that. Particularly if there is going to be storage combined with solar, then you'll have a different load impact. As an example, of if you now have a sense of what is on the system, then you can have a impact on what you may have to plan for.
So I guess trying to kind of 3-part communicate, but I think you're asking, David, is how is the DER forecasting influencing the load forecast?
Actually is in the DER forecasting. Are you is part of that estimating a load impact or load shape of that, or is this only going to be some estimate in the load forecast process?
I will defer to the cap planning teams because I don't want to speak out of place, as I'm still not 100% sure what you're looking for there.
Yeah, go ahead, jump in, sir.
Go ahead, Zim.
Sorry, trying to get the right buttons. So as we are incorporating the energy storage, we do have to look to the timeline it takes for it to recharge overnight, typically. And we do incorporate that in, or as it comes on the system and we have more to work with, we will be incorporating that storage time in the analysis in areas where we anticipate it'll raise a concern. Does that answer your question?
It does partially. Thank you. So that's was one of my main questions. Thank you. Second ones, and these are going to be a little more specific, which are, and it's already been referenced earlier on in the call, which was, there will be now, starting January 1st, a smart inverters that are going to have certain response, to system conditions, and that will have impact on the operation and planning of the distribution system. Will the, utilities be tracking, or somehow determining how many of these new resources are going to be on, and then have an impact on, how the grid is operating? Are they going to be modeled separately?
I think we'll have to take that one back to our DER specialist and get a better understanding.
All right. And then while I'm on a roll, my third question, and this has been mentioned before, but I'm going to mention it at this point, is Order 2222 impacts. And so as you move forward and we perhaps will see DER aggregations, is there any plans to look at how you will be planning for the grid based on, more DERs who are aggregated and separately bidding them, being bid into the wholesale market, and how that will affect, how you plan and operate the system?
Go for it, Ethan.
Hi, David, just to address both really, FERC 2222 and smart inverters. We have several teams and lots of committees and EU level and EPRI level discussions going on about how to do this. And the answer is yes, but the particulars are still really being worked out. There's, we are doing studies, people are doing modeling. There are, it is a very evolving situation for us. And it's not, this is one of the reasons why I'm a little testy when it comes to people asking exactly what we're doing, because we're in an adaptation phase where we're figuring that out. And it is an industry-wide adaptation. Like I said, EPRI is involved. People are gathering data, comparing notes, comparing best practices. And so the answer is yes, both as individual utilities and as an industry, we are addressing these things, but the answers are not set in stone yet by any means. And individual utilities are going to choose different ownership models, whether or not they aggregate themselves. There's going to be individual monitoring and control decisions made. These are going to be impacted by, and Eric is jumping in, so I probably said something wrong here. But this is a fluid situation, David. So expect adaptation and not perhaps the most exact answers. And now Eric's going to say something very exact.
Before Eric talks, I just wanted to say thank you, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that this is a fluid and a developing. I just was curious and wanted to know what was at least the plans or at least the thoughts on the part of the utilities. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, sir, and thank you, Ethan. Eric.
Yes, Ethan, you hit the nail on the head, right? And with FERC Order 2222 being more a PJM FERC initiative, for lack of a better word, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Exelon utilities here right now. We are presently in what we call FERC Order 2222 readiness mode, and looking at what is it we need to have in place to be able to be ready for aggregation studies, to be able to look at what the impacts are on aggregation on our systems under the different programs at the PJM level. And we're also looking at how we start preparing to start modeling utilizing the new inverters, the smart inverters that will be coming on the system. So there's a lot we are doing in preparation, and just wanted to share that insight. Great question, David. Appreciate the question. I hope that helped you and the rest of the stakeholders here to have some insight on what we're doing from a preparation basis here at the Exelon companies.
Thank you, sir. Jorge, and then Al.
So yeah, thank you so much, David, for the question, especially number 2. So, if we're going to have these new capabilities of inverters, it's very important that that capability is modeled, right? So part of the planning process is to model the system. If we don't bring in these capabilities into the modeling, we have a problem. So there are 2 things: is making sure that these capabilities are incorporated into your modeling, and second of all, how it is that the stakeholders are going to be reassured that you are truly modeling these capabilities. And that goes into the issue of the transparency. So stakeholders need to be able to say, yeah, we know that you are using these capabilities, and you need to model the capabilities as you are doing your planning. So we understand that this is projectively, but somehow we need to have some kind of a timeline into when this is going to materialize, because the capabilities are going to be there, right? Starting January 1st is mandated. So how it is that we are ensuring, just by having the new functionality, if we don't use the functionality into the planning, it's going to be a missed opportunity.
All right, thank you, sir. And it sounds like I guess you're going, I don't want to say going through the motions, but you're in the process of trying to figure out how to incorporate the capabilities. Eric or Ethan, Jacob, do you guys have a ballpark timeline? I know these things take a while.
I don't have a specific on that, but one thing I was going to mention, Pepco is absolutely interested in exploring further the capabilities of smart inverters. And we actually put forth a program to pilot the use of smart inverters to be able to address hosting capacity and to be able to learn from that pilot, right? Pilot, those use cases and learn from them to be able to continue to evolve their uses. But the Office of People's Counsel actually, put a motion forward to strike that program.
Right.
So just wanted to, note that.
All right. Appreciate the pilot. Don't need to get into who struck John over who's for it against it right now. All right. Mr. Bartlett, I'm coming back to you. Ethan, did you want to weigh in on that, sir?
I just one response to Jorge, that we got OPC's comments on Tuesday night and did engaged subject matter experts as quickly as we could. And one thing that I was asked to relay is that we have limited information on customer settings right now. And so, as far as we cannot monitor every smart inverter at this point, and we don't know, for instance, when it is curtailing for volt watt or any setting, is the exact language I was asked to relay by an SME who couldn't be here today. But Jorge, it's glad to be continuing that 5-year conversation.
I know this has been some time, but no, this is good. This is good. We're converting into something. But let me ask you, Ethan. But isn't it true that starting January 1st, right? There's a default profiles, right? So starting January 1st, any inverter connected in Maryland, you could safely assume that those settings should be in place. And these are autonomous settings, right? So you can bring that into your modeling because they should be there. It's part of the rec, right?
I can't speak to that. I'm an economist, but I can tell you that our smart inverter settings were approved by the commission. Is the other thing I was prepped for. That's all I can really offer you at this point. My apologies.
All right.
Yeah, please, sir. I was coming to you next.
Yeah, if I may just pull on a string a little bit here. Jorge. So there are a lot of studies that were performed before January 1st for DERs to be on the system that did not require smart inverters, right? So starting January 1st, any studies that we are doing will have to take into consideration smart inverters being included in that design, in that deployment. So you will see or possibly see systems coming on board in 2024 that there's not a smart inverter because it wasn't studied that way, right? Because we studied them way before the date was decided. So just wanted to share, that it's important for us to understand the timing again, right? We keep using these dates and saying, at exactly that date, this needs to happen. Come on, you understand. I know you understand that this is a transformational effort and it takes time for it to integrate and adopt. So just help me out. Help me help you, right? Help me help you with.
No, and I hear you. And listen, so realistic timelines are okay, definitely. But let's try to set up the timelines. So
Right.
so we got the January 1st date, right? Because
Yes,
so how we can tap onto that, creating that timeline.
we'll get there. We'll get there, right? There needs to be a runway, right? Plane just doesn't take off, right? And in addition to that, right? So that was a smart inverters, right? We look at smart inverters during interconnection studies, right? That's where the true modeling and analysis is taking place, is during interconnection studies. Planners are looking at large megawatts. We want to make sure capacity is there for our customers. And it's important, although both teams work hand in hand together, right? Both teams work hand in hand together. There are different types of analysis that's done when we are talking about the modeling and analysis around interconnections, DER, versus looking at the system holistically. And I know you understand this, right? I know you understand this. So it's, as we're having those conversations, right? I think it's important for us to realize the modeling aspects with the DER versus the holistic view on how we plan the system. There is, they're sort of structured in different teams, right? If not all utilities, right, structure that in different teams. It's not the same person who's responsible for planning of the circuit is doing the interconnection studies. So just as I said, I'm hoping to help the stakeholders on this work group learn from. I'm trying to be transparent and give you a little bit of insight of how we operate. We work together to provide a holistic view, because when we do interconnection studies, the planners are always brought into the conversation, because nothing happens on a system that the planner is not aware of or shouldn't be aware of. But they're two separate teams. Hope that helps a little bit. And please, Jorge, give us some runway. Give us some runway. All right.
No, listen, this is very useful, Eric. And you're absolutely right. You see, we could see them as being two teams, and especially in the issue of hosting capacity, right? So most oftentimes, right, during the interconnection request, you may have a trigger for an upgrade, right? So most oftentimes, what will be do, or it doesn't have to be other utilities, they will try to heavy out transformers or reconductor, right? So that's mainly on the interconnection aspect on the request. Now, what we're trying to do on distribution system planning is the same issue of hosting capacity Instead of looking into how it is that we're going to heavy up or reconductor, now we're going to looking into demand side management. Now we're going to be looking into flexible load. Now we're going to be looking into potential of aggregation of DER, right? All these other components that most oftentimes is not looked when we're doing interconnection, right?
I'm not sure I totally align with you there, Jorge, as I shared, and I don't want this to be a debating section here. Is the last thing I want to do is get on Judge McLean's wrong side here. But
I'm not going to talk about you, but at least on the other utilities,
let me
share.
Let me share a little bit.
Where utility has said, well, I'm not going to upgrade because I got all these flexible load that I'm going to deploy.
So you're talking about gross load versus net load and things of that nature, just to bring you into the planning terminologies, right? We have these conversations, right? And this is one of the things that I sit back and I cringe when I hear some of the stakeholders speak about what we're not doing as a utility, right? We work together from an interconnection perspective and also a holistic planning perspective. We look at the system holistically for interconnections and just regular load. We don't do it in vacuum. So just wanted to share that insight. I see Al's hand is up. I don't want to take up too much of the airwaves here, but thank you for the opportunity to share that insight, Judge McLean. I appreciate your patience with me.
No, you're fine, sir. It's not, seriously not a problem at all. Mr. Bartlett and then Tim.
Yeah, thank you. And I thought all the aspects of this recent discussion, whether it's about aggregation or flexible load or smart inverters, just illustrate again the reason why the points for participation have to include at least the midterm process, because the system is so dynamic. Any projections that any of us make starting now out 15 years will only be the grossest of projections. They're necessary, but they will not, for example, tell us exactly what's going to happen if community choice aggregation, as being evaluated by Montgomery County, actually becomes something that more counties adopt. That may have tremendous results on the system, as well as just individual aggregation under FERC 2222. How smart inverters work as the number and the volume go up, as the number of distributed energy resources go up. Those things, the long-term projections will, as somebody, I think Ethan said, they do get, even the long-term ones get modified progressively, but the way that modification happens is going to require that partnership, that interaction with others, whether it's counties or developers or whatever, that are involved in the process. So I'm glad to hear Eric saying that all the different components of the utility structure are working together, but I just believe that there are going to be additional inputs needed from other stakeholders.
Thank you, sir. Tim and then Ethan.
Was Ethan raising his hand to speak to Al's, or is he just getting in line?
I want to put a bow around it.
Okay. All right.
We'll let him then.
In the spirit of Christmas, I just was going to try and draw back, but I think, we talked about clearly the smart inverter, the settings aren't retroactive. We getting that, there's lots of inverters online already that are not going to be, known for what exactly their settings are and how they're going to operate. Part of the problem that we have with operating DER right now. But to Jorge's point of we are going to start putting on inverters with known settings. And I would assume that as part of that, not being part of the interconnection working group and not part of those discussions, I would assume that the adoption of those settings looked at how they are going to operate on the grid. And so we have that the teams that work on this have an understanding of how they would be modeled and how they're going to impact the grid. And just trying to like clarify that, like, that's what we are going to be looking for when we start looking at the process and the inputs to forecasting, is we're going to want to look at how are you modeling these DER on the system, so that we can understand how that actually impacts the forecast. So and hearing you, Ethan, saying, you know, like, that because a lot of this stuff is still in flux, that might not be like something that you can have that discussion today with us. That's fine. But I think one of the biggest takeaways from, I think, our comments and our point is that these are the things that I think need to be in place when we start reviewing forecasting processes and methodologies in these, you know, multi-year rate plans, et cetera, or like any other, you know, any other proceeding that we're reviewing these. So yeah, that's kind of my point. It's that, you know, even if we're not talking about exactly what's happening, how you're modeling them today, this is what we see as being the needed type of information that we need to see and understand, so that we can feel comfortable and give feedback on the forecasting process.
May I go to my bow? Excellent, because I think this is going to, you know, I'm hearing a lot of the same things, and Eli and Al Bartlett were both part of a conversation we had during phase 1 that was very similar. And what we heard then, and what I think I'm hearing now, is that people want clarity into what we're doing. And one of the original in the assumptions and the data, and they want input into that. And I think that's all appropriate. And that's exactly what we, in our straw man, we're envisioning, is a process whereby we receive feedback on those things. We get your views on what assumptions, what data, and also, though, we report out on what we're using. We report out on our progress towards certain goals that support the Climate Solutions Now Act and smart inverter settings, smart inverter penetration. These are the kind of things that I think would be encompassed by that report, the kind of thing that you all are interested in, the kind of thing that informs the CSNA. And I'm going to stop myself and ask you all, you know, is that am I hearing you correctly? Is that where you want us to go? Because, you know, this is supposed to be a stakeholder driven process. And so we're looking for the outcome that serves you most. And so am I hearing that correctly? We talk about our implementation times, we talk about what we've learned and how that's impacting our assumptions and analysis and forecasting, and receive your feedback. That kind of a feedback loop, that kind of a process, is that where you want us to go?
Thanks, Ethan. I'll just speak for myself.
Please.
And I appreciated all those conversations we had in phase 1 that were, around the same issues. So I guess one thing that we're trying to do is to nail it down. The other is the perspective that the stakeholders, it's important for them to understand, see clearly, reflect on, feedback on your processes. I'm still, you know, I spend most of my time actually working with the distributed energy industry, mostly solar, because they have more issues of interconnection on the distribution system. And so there is a perspective that comes from that side that actually is meaningful and important in terms of sitting down with you guys at the table and talking about what is the experience from the end users and the end developers in this new distributed energy environment. What is their experience? How does it help you do the best job of planning? It's not that people want to take the planning away, but that they want the planning to be as well informed as possible. And that's what I'm talking for. So knowing what you're doing is very useful. Knowing the experiences you've had from the pilots or from general experience is great. And then there is also experience on the other side that I think will help the planning process be better.
Thank you for that, Al. And I just, for my own part, I would like to say that a lot of my job when I'm not in these work groups is working with DER developers, discussing how we can partner on grant applications, on projects. I have, 2 battery storage projects that I managed this year, and have 2 major DER developers that were behind them that have given me, we've worked very closely. They've given me a lot of insights into how their operations are and what their business models need, and accommodating that and figuring out how we can work together with those developers and developers who are just building their own projects on our system for completely non-system reasons is really part of the job we have. And so I want you to, I definitely hear you, and definitely we want to bring more of that into our planning, but those are the conversations we do have. So I just wanted to share that.
Right. And I just think that part of our job is to systematize that approach, so that it's not just limited to those smaller projects, but to the broader experience. So, and I understand that the battery storage experience had variable outcomes, and that the private sector partners had variable successes. And so, there's a limited learning from just that, but there's going to be a lot more broad experience out there on an ongoing basis that it would be really important to take into consideration.
Absolute agreement.
All right, thank you. Don't go away, Ethan. Jorge.
That's right. Don't go away, Ethan, because let's follow up.
Still not an engineer.
No, but not really quick. It's about the level of detail, right? In regards to what it is that we would like to see. Is, I think detail on the modeling is important. And a quick example, we have seen from other utilities that will remain unnamed, identification of voltage violations when they have DER, when they have energy storage. I'm so sorry, folks. When they have energy storage available, and then the questions are posed, are you modeling your system to discharge your batteries as a way to manage that potential voltage violation, right? So responses are no, we always assume that the batteries are charged all the time. So it is important to understand how it is that you're modeling, and that level of detail is important, because there are going to be determinations being made with the modeling that you're running. So some level of detail in regards to the modeling is important for stakeholders to be able to provide meaningful feedback.
And I think we are in alignment there, and PG&E is piloting one project, and other EU companies have their own processes going on, and part of this process, I agree, will be us reporting on our progress, reporting on how these function, reporting on being transparent about those issues. So absolutely agreed.
All right, thanks. Don't go away, Ethan. Anybody else have any comments and follow up to Ethan? All right. Any other comments on the utility or the joint utilities DER forecast and load forecast comments? Okay, why don't we move on to Potomac Edison? They submitted some comments for blocks 3 and 4. Any response to those?
So I can speak to just a few items on there. So just on block 3, Potomac Edison, we incorporate into our forecasting any large DERs that we know about, but the general adoption of DERs is not included in the forecast outside of the historical numbers. So if there's say there's a 3% growth in DERs on a given circuit, then that would be embedded in our historical numbers, and that would be included going forward. We don't have a tool yet to incorporate DERs into the forecasting. Our sister utility, that would apply to EVs as well, but our sister utility in Pennsylvania is doing a pilot with a company, I think it's called Electro Tempo, that does EV forecasting, and they had said that it also includes DER forecasting, although I found out yesterday that that their model does not include DER forecasting, and they had within this pilot had planned on contracting that part of it out. So we did not want a third-party contractor to be part of this pilot. So we removed that as part of this pilot. So we'll be looking at other options for DER forecasting to be included in models going forward. But we do recognize that that is certainly a need, that our current model is not going to suit the needs going forward. So we're in that process right now. But I'm open to any questions.
Thank you, sir. Any follow-up to PE?
So Dave, really quick, this is when you said it's embedded, that means that over time you look at the load, the actual load, and any reduction or change to the load is assumed to be DR.
Yeah. So like historical loads up until now are included in our modeling. So to the point that DERs are incorporated in that. So if a given circuit has, I'll throw out a number, say has a 3% growth in DERs, then that's going to be incorporated in our historical figures. Does that make sense? But like if that's going to be an S curve going forward, we would miss that in the model. So we're looking to get that incorporated.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Jorge. Anybody else for PE? All right. Thanks, Dave. Get off easy today. Anything from SMECO? Okay. All right. One of the things, OPC, Eli, did you want to hit on your comments any more than you already have, sir?
Yeah, we're happy to do just maybe a quick overview because I don't
Okay.
think we've discussed the key points, but I'm going to let Tim take over and do that.
Very good.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we have hit quite a few of these points. So I think our main parts were, looking specifically box 3, we noted basically, I think somewhat aligned with even what Dave just said of like, trying to get a better forecast of DER individually, like separate from load, understanding both on a like temporal level as well as a geographic level of where is it happening and when. So that kind of incorporates hourly load profiles as well, or hourly, DER profiles, but that corresponds as well with, your hourly load forecasting kind of moves directly into the box 4 of talking about granularity for your entire forecasting process, moving more towards that hourly level, moving more towards, using your, SCADA data from individual feeders and substations so that you have more visibility on, finer both time and geographic scales. And I think we're pretty aligned with the utilities on this. I think they understand that. I think that they're moving in the same direction as we think, they should be. We talked a bit about multiple scenarios for forecasting. I think this is the main place where your multiple scenarios that we talked about in box 1 kind of manifests, looking at the sensitivities towards potential future outcomes, whether that is looking at the CSNA, and what types of outcomes we're expecting there versus business as usual, etc. Again, I think that the utilities have an idea of what this is, and I think we as you dive deeper into the distribution system planning process, as you go into individual utilities, planning, it needs to look specifically at those assumptions that are changing between scenarios. That's the important part there, and that's kind of the analysis that we would expect. And then I think the last thing that we touched on that maybe was a point of disagreement that we touched on our in our reply comments about the transparency and stakeholder engagement of just and I think the utilities kind of spoke to their their proposal, and like specifically, stakeholder engagement being tied into each of those steps. I think our position, our emphasis is on that second step of when the forecasting assumptions and things are being made, of including engagement there, and that the stakeholders are involved specifically in the creation and vetting of assumptions and inputs to these forecasting models. It's not about just getting our feedback beforehand. It's not about reviewing them after the fact. It's really getting our involvement when it's happening, so that we can really help to drive where it goes from there. It's in my opinion much more fruitful than being on the front side trying to say what we might want to do, and on the back side saying what should have been done. And I think that mostly covers what we had put into our initial comments and as well as our replies.
All right, thank you, sir. Appreciate it. And I know we talked a lot about your positions already, but I appreciate that summary. Any follow-up on OPC's comments?
I think we're going to kick off the subgroup for stakeholder engagement. I think that's a great place to have that discussion.
All right. All right, very good. All right, anybody else? Yes, sir.
So Sierra Club also put comments in on,
yes,
and just, is this a time to bring those up?
Yeah, please. Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate the reminder, sir.
And it's going to be pretty quick, because the themes that were in the comments, I think we've already kind of beaten down pretty hard, which was the need to do scenarios, to need to do granular, forecasting, particularly also load impacts. We've already discussed that, and then also the last major point, besides the fact that we recommend to really look at the best practices for tools, models, and approaches, and I appreciate work being done with EPRI, et cetera, is we've already discussed this also, was that when looking at DERs and looking at load forecasting in the future, need to also incorporate estimates or forecasting and modeling of demand flexibility and utilization of virtual power plants into future plans. So we've already discussed most of those. I don't want to belabor them. I just want to make sure we at least was brought up during this call. Thanks.
I appreciate that, sir. And sir, can I bother you? I must have misplaced them in my inbox. Would it be too much trouble for you to shoot me those again, sir?
Yeah, I can send them to you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. All right. Any follow-up on Mr. Cathan and Sierra Club's comments? All right, there's a couple things on the map that I want to talk about, but before, oh, yes, Mr. Verchinsky.
Yeah, I had made some comments, and I think we've settled the one on DERs, at least comments that I had. But there was one suggestion that I had made, and it's been brought up time after time after time by the utilities, and that is forecasts.
Your 15-year forecast, sir? Your suggestion?
No, I'm talking about what do we use for forecasts? I honestly think that that's such a an area that needs to be addressed, that I proposed a separate box for that. What forecast models would be used, what data and assumptions would be used, and most important, what model validation would happen. That affects basically both of these boxes. And I understand the reluctance of utilities to use forecasts for additions that are going into the grid that they do not control. But that's a conversation that everybody's going to have to make. What are the stakeholders that are brought in? What forecasts are they using, and are they acceptable to both the utilities and the commission, et cetera? So I think that that's a major item that we haven't talked much about. We've talked all around it, but we have not talked directly to it. So that's one item that I'd like to bring up. And the second one is in box 4. I am not, as I said, into bulk power forecasting or what bulk power does. But I was kind of surprised when I found out that basically the local utilities basically are involved with transmission planning. I thought that was done by a separate entity, namely PJM, but apparently the utilities are very much involved with that. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that because DERs, particularly, I think now over 10 megawatts, are the purview of PJM. Everything below that is, as I understand it, and I could be wrong, is the purview of the utilities in Maryland. So my concern is if there's going to be DERs put into PJM, that's going to impact on the overall need for DERs to reach the goals of the CSNA. And hence my suggestion that when we do this tech conference, that there be some discussion of how that might impact the planning for DSP within Maryland. So those are the two major items that I wanted to bring up.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. And to go back to your first item, you'd referenced the models, the data, assumptions, validation. Are you looking for, I guess, moving forward, like, so at the end of the work group, to require that each utility include in their plans, we're going to use model X, Y, and Z. This is the data we're going to use. This is the assumptions we're going to use, and this is how we're going to validate. Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah.
Or are you looking for the specifics kind of during this work group process now?
I think that that is probably going to be the subject of a separate work group. I think we need to recognize that is a huge issue, particularly because the utilities do not own any of these distributed generators. It's all going to be done by the private sector. So what do we grab onto that is comfortable for the utilities as well as for the commissioners?
Okay. And when you say separate work group, do you mean a separate meeting for us, or are you talking about a separate, entirely different work group?
I think that's probably going to have to be a separate work group.
Okay.
It is a huge issue from my standpoint.
All right. All right. I appreciate you specifying that, sir. All right. Any thoughts on on, possibly having another box kind of connected to these two in terms of how the utilities develop the forecasts?
I'll say, Judge, I think we may have missed those comments originally from Paul. Looking back, it looks like that comment was prior to the previous meeting, so I think we just kind of missed it in our evaluations as we were prepping for today's meeting. So we can take that back and prepare to provide comments and perspective on it.
Okay, that's fair. All right. I mean, I think if we're, it doesn't scream, a showstopper, for the utilities to do that again, but that's just me. What are any thoughts on the PJM forecasts with the DERs, or you just want to kind of wait and see what the technical conference says on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say at a high level, and Paul, thank you for kind of walking through your thoughts today. I think that helped clarify some of the written comments for me at least. Obviously there's already kind of coordination that goes on between the distribution system planning teams and the bulk power system teams, and so that coordination exists today and will continue to exist. As we outlined kind of in our comments, certainly open to further discussion around that PJM perspective, but I will say now at least that that coordination already does exist between those teams, and we'll continue to do so both in both directions, at least as much as I understand.
Right. And I think I know Eric has talked about the coordination between the distribution side and the transmission side of the utilities, and the coordination was a kind of an overarching box that hits the load forecast. So, Mr. Bartlett.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. I just wanted to note that maybe as people reflect on Paul's set of comments on this box, which were sent prior to the last meeting, but they're out there. It would be worth noting he, as he typically does, has listed a number of specific items that fit each of the broader categories that the box talks about, or modified those. But they're quite specific. And in terms of utility, that approach is quite useful. So if people could look at it through that lens as well, do we agree with those lists? I think I remember some time back, Paul made some suggestions back, I think in box 1, about levels of granularity, for example, that were quite specific, and people looked at it and they said that's good. So that kind of moves us toward that specific definitions that we're looking for. So if people could just keep that in mind as they look at his comments, that would be helpful.
Yeah, and I know we talked about definitions last week, and it seemed like everybody was okay with that. But Jacob, do you have Mr. Berchinski's comments? Looks like at least he sent them to me on November 27th. It was a Monday, so you probably either got them that after. Oh, got them? Okay.
Yeah, I was able to find them. Yep.
Awesome. Great. Okay. All right. All right. Ethan, I'm sorry.
Not at all. I just wanted to note that regarding Paul's questions about forecasting, assumptions, verification and such, BG&E alone included over 30 slides in phase 1 that are included in the final report. And I know PEPCO has there are similar slides from them. You can find them in the attachment to the final report, which they actually make up the bulk of the 236 pages. So a lot of information is already there, and we always prefer to refer back to what we've already done.
All right, thank you. And I will take a look at that as well. Mr. Bartlett.
Yeah, I just wanted to note, I mean, I think one of the reasons we're having this conversation is that those presentations, in a couple of the utilities basically said they don't have DER forecasting, as Potomac Edison just did. And PHI does have a DER forecasting approach, but it actually levels out where their capacity levels out. We've had this discussion before, but so I think that going back to phase one presentations doesn't really take us very far forward. That's really, I think, as people have appropriately said, phase one basically summarized the way things are being done now, not the way we think they should be done in the future. So I just wanted to not have us waste too much time going backwards.
No, that's a good point. Ethan, Jacob, is that something? Is it possible for the joint utilities anyway, or PE or SMECO to update, maybe do a quick update as for those slides as to what you intend to do going forward on the forecasting front?
I think and Ethan, feel free to correct me here. I think in terms of what we view as where we're trying to go is kind of what we had in our comments this week, right? We had both our current process and then that kind of future view.
Okay.
I think that future view is really kind of capturing where we're envisioning going from a forecasting perspective.
Okay, understood. All right. I'm sorry, I'm getting this. Screen, the shade is getting right in my face. David.
Thank you. So far, we're talking about forecasting load. I think it is also important that we know when the utilities expect to be doing their next stages of smartening the grid. And again, I'm going to stay with the smart grid because I think that also is important to understand in this process. And I don't know whether that's in the stage in boxes 1, 2, or 3, or 4, or further on. But for example, I know we have AMI. I know there are phasars in the transmission system, but when is the utility moving towards some form of control and two-way transmission of information to be able to allow for more intelligent load control? And I haven't heard us talk about that yet.
All right. Thank you, sir. Jacob, you got any thoughts as to where that might fall? Maybe grid needs. I don't know.
Yeah, I was trying to look as well. I don't know if that kind of touches on the box that is coordination with grid mod planning. Just trying to making sure I was fully understanding kind of, David, where you're coming from.
I guess my question is, do you have plans for updating the communication capability and control of the grid? Are you going to make your substations smarter? Are you going to go provide capability of providing load control via communications? Are you going to allow vehicle to grid, and how are you going to control that? And you got to be, I'm sure you're thinking about that at some point. And I guess the question is, do you have plans to do any of that in the future, in the 15-year time frame that we're talking about? I don't think anyone's expecting you to go pin you down to a day or date, but I think the thought is in 7 years from now, we are expecting to upgrade our transmissions, our distribution system to allow localized control at transformer level, or to allow communication of large loads so that they can be scheduled, to be able to schedule EV charging, something along those lines.
Hi, Ethan, back on the line here. David, I would say the answer to your question is yes. We have various pilots going on right now. The BG&E is moving forward with our school bus V2G pilot, which will involve a lot of the technologies you're discussing. We've put forward grant applications. We have EU-wide initiatives as far as DERMS. All of these things are in flight at various points, and then different OPCOs are going to implement them at different rates. And thank you for not asking us for specific dates, because that's really hard. But the answer is yes, we are moving on all of those issues, and we recognize that they are what is going to be required for us to manage the grid of the future. The Jacob, what is the climate ready grid?
Yep.
Yeah.
I was going to say, as outlined, as we outlined in the climate ready grid, a lot of that touches on that monitoring and control. And Ethan, you touched on a lot of the in-flight pilots and projects that were already in motion on, but very much see that as the vision of the future of the grid and working in that direction to enable that kind of level of monitor and control of the system.
I guess my question is, where in our JADE roadmap does that fall in? Does that discussion, that transparency fall in so that people on the outside will have an idea of what's coming in the future? How does that affect the grid of the future? That's kind of my question. Ethan, you and I talked to Solar Focus about that and about what you've got going right now, but I'm just talking about we're talking about distribution planning.
I would look at our strawman proposal. We do have report out moments in there, and that is where we would be giving people updates on our implementation of these kinds of technologies. And that is, we would like to be able to report out and explain how, the technologies we are implementing are supporting the CSNA. I do have to pop off to another meeting. I did want to say before I go, though, happy holidays to you all, and really appreciate a good collaborative conversation today. It was very nicely in the spirit of the season, and appreciate that.
All right. Have a great holiday. Take care. All right. All right. So I guess I'll go back and look at the straw man, but so Jacob, you were thinking it's kind of like under that sub box, coordinate distribution system planning with grid modification planning as needed.
Yeah, that may be kind of where what David's talking about kind of comes in. I think honestly this kind of takes us a little full circle to the beginning of the conversation of today around grid management and what technologies and
planning.
Yeah,
good planning.
So but that may be kind of where that may fall into the JADE process map.
Right. Yeah, and my guess is if we want to talk about it, it looks like obviously it's under goals and objectives, but it looks like it'd be the next few boxes would probably be the most appropriate time to address it. Would you agree? Since it's kind of connected. Are you? I'm sorry, I wasn't looking. Are you?
Yeah, sorry, I was shaking my head.
You're shaking no or shaking yes?
Shaking, yeah. I think.
Yeah, you don't seem as excited about it, Mr. Berchinsky.
Yeah, I actually had proposed a place for this, and that's under DERs, which to me made the most sense.
Okay.
I had put in a separate category of utility demand management. And this would be, I gave you a list of 8 items that were like DER aggregation, EVSE, time of use, etc.
Got it.
That would deal with precisely this subject, because you can't talk about DERs without also saying, well, how are we going to manage all of these? Mm-hmm. So I thought that was the appropriate box to do that in order to come up with a holistic planning approach for a climate ready grid.
All right. Thank you, sir. All right. So I guess Jacob, when you guys go back and look at Mr. Berchinsky's comments from the 27th, maybe weigh in on, in addition to what he's got laid out there, whether or not you think smart grid should go in there, or maybe a sub bullet or something to that effect.
Yeah, we can take a look. Okay. I mean, just kind of off the cuff right now, I think, as we've kind of mentioned before, just making sure to differentiate between forecasting and what's actually incorporated in forecasting and actual grid operations and grid management, and continue recognizing there's obviously some coordination there, and how we are able to operate it influences what we can forecast, but just making sure we're continuing to focus on the forecasting piece here.
Oh, okay, absolutely. All right. One question I had for you, Jacob, or I guess just for folks in general. We're directly under DER forecast and load forecast are a couple of boxes. I'm kind of interested in the first one. Said projected policy impact. And I guess for our purposes, I guess that would be the CSNA goals and the 7802 goal list of statutory requirements. I mean, how, if at all, can the utilities work in those, the policy, or I guess the impacts on the various policies into the DER and load forecasts?
Yeah, and I think this is, kind of leans back to the straw
man. Right.
theme. But no, I think, even the box under in terms of, stakeholder input and everything, right? We, really outlined step one of that proposal is, translating those policies into actual impacts to the forecast, right? And having those conversations with stakeholders. So I think, that proposal there really hits on what these two boxes are looking to accomplish.
Okay. So at least keeping that box would make sense.
Yeah, I believe so.
All right. Okay. Well, that's good. Anybody else want to comment on that? All right. We covered a lot of ground, but I don't know exactly what we agreed on, if anything. Seems like everyone's generally okay with the current context or contents of the box 3 and 4. Obviously, there needs to be, or parties, the non-utilities would like a lot more specifics in terms of the granularity, the transparency. And obviously, we're going to have a transparency subgroup. But is that generally, I mean, and I know there's some other items we need to follow up on, but is that a half decent read from today?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was relative alignment in terms of the boxes for 3 and 4 in terms of what we're looking to accomplish. Obviously, like you said, taking the straw proposal and fleshing out more detail. But that was one of the action items coming from today.
Okay. Yeah, and I've got a list of things we need to hit on, but Eli, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, it seems like we're on the right track, but I guess I'm not 100% clear where we landed on most of these things.
That makes two of us.
Yeah. And so I don't know. I'm wondering if I'm trying to figure out what the best path forward is, in terms of understanding where there is alignment. And I'm wondering, for example, I'm just like looking back at the original comments that we filed on behalf of OPC, and I just don't know that we've directly addressed things. For example, one of the things was utilities should produce independent forecasts for DER, EV, and beneficial electrification that captures the variation of potential adoption across circuits and the available flexibility of the load.
Okay.
How, just on that specific statement, do the utilities agree that is something that they should produce? And maybe just stop there to understand, just on that specific point, do we have agreement? Are utilities on board with that statement? And if so, then I think the next step is, in this final report, we have a recommendation to the commission that says utilities should produce independent forecasts for DER, EV, and BE.
All right.
And to clarify, same statement across each of OPC's key
your actions to bridge the gap.
Actions to bridge the gap. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. We try to lay it out in a way that, makes it relatively simple for folks to be able to respond and say, yes, we can reasonably achieve these actions. We can do so in XYZ time frame. And these are the types of recommendations that it would be great to be able to give to the commission, because then we can come back and actually draft up a regulation based on it.
Okay, fair enough. All right. Let me come back to Eli. Mr. Bartlett.
Yeah, I was going to suggest, I think we came to consensus about whether we call it grid management or grid planning.
Oh, I think we're circling back on that. That's yeah. I think I know.
I thought we actually had agreement except for the title.
Well, I think the title's the least of our problems. I think folks were on board with the planning, but we still have like 5 different definitions out there. What I have is Ethan wanted to circle back on that when we got to block 6, which was grid needs and locational value assessment. And I think that's where we left it according to my notes.
If we can circle back, I think that's fine.
Well, that's just on grid management / planning, whatever.
So we only agreed on a title, maybe.
I think we've gotten rid of holistic. We've agreed on that.
Right. We got rid of, that's right, on site. That's it.
Yeah, I know we talked about on site.
That was in David's definition. Sorry.
We got rid of
that. We agreed on that.
Baby steps.
I guess it raises the question of how actually, so we don't, if we have to circle back on everything, then we end up at the end with nothing done. So how can we in this process essentially either vote or, get to cloture and then document that so that we can keep moving forward? Because we've built up a huge accumulation. It's like a big snowplow going down the road. We've got all this stuff piled on the side of the road that we have to go back to. So how can we do this?
Well, I mean, I hear you, sir. And I guess one of the things we or I have to make sure that I'm keeping track of is what we have to circle back on. So right now we've got the establishment of two subgroups. We're going to circle back on this grid management. I mean, we've got 5 different definitions out there. So, I mean, if folks want to weigh in on what those definitions are or start thinking about it when, Ethan and Jacob present on box 6, that'd be fine. I've got the utilities that they're going to come back on Mr. Cathan's demand flexible, load flexibility or demand flexibility definition. OPC is going to follow up with the incorporation of policy sensitivity. Or policy, I think it was policy sensitivity. Does that, Ethan, look like you're scratching you're squinting. I can go back and look at the video. That's the second watch is always a lot of fun if you haven't tried it out. So I have to work on making the recommendation or the summaries and what we've kind of hit so far, what we've decided. I have to do better with that. The joint utilities are going to come back on the distributed generation issue with what Jorge was talking about, penalties, contracts. How do you make these people responsible? Let's see. And then let's see. We've got joint utilities, how the forecasts are developed. You guys are going to look to see like what goes in that potential box that Paul had suggested. All right. Yes, sir. Eli.
I was just going to say, I don't know if I'm entirely clear on the follow-up ask for OPC. Was that an ask that came? I think that might have come from Ethan, who's now left. I don't know if someone else from the utilities is exactly clear.
I'll go back and look.
Okay.
Let's see if I can find it.
And then can you also clarify, you mentioned a couple of subgroups, can you clarify the path forward on those two?
Well, the metrics, which apparently you're spearheading now, so that's you. And then we have I guess the transparency subgroup that DeAndre had suggested. I don't know if there's actually a person that's going to lead that.
I thought that one translated into, and maybe this was separate, was translating into flushing out the straw proposal more and getting into those details, actually building out the details into that.
Yeah, agreed. I didn't know. Okay, we don't have to call it a subgroup if you don't want to. We can call it the straw man.
Oh, I mean, I'm fine calling it a subgroup. I just, I thought that's my understanding was as that's what translated into was the focus of that group.
Yes, yeah, we're trying to figure out where in the utilities straw man proposal, the concrete points where stakeholders can participate, and whether the utilities are amenable to having some kind of participation in the midterm plan.
Yeah, and I think volunteered to take the lead.
Right.
On organizing the group.
Yeah, and that last point, you guys, the joint utilities, we're going to look at Mr. Verchinsky's comments that were filed on the 27th and respond to those.
Yep.
All right. So Ethan, I will follow up with you.
That makes more sense, by the way, on the stakeholder engagement piece. So thank you. For
okay,
clarifying.
good.
I think
My apologies.
We'll likely work on something as well, and I don't know if we'll necessarily be able to have it for the next meeting, but we'll plan to think through what OPC also thinks a reasonable process involving stakeholders looks like. So we'll plan to come ready to that discussion with that.
Okay.
Right.
All right, very good. Well, yeah, and I wouldn't anticipate. I mean, Jacob, are you anticipating having more of a discussion on the transparency now, or kind of offline, and then you're going to try and incorporate those comments into your straw man?
Yeah, I thought the thought was to have some conversations offline, and for the stakeholders that want to be engaged in that.
All right. Okay. No, that was my understanding as well. I just want to make sure we're on the same page. All right.
We're happy to be involved in those, Jacob.
Excellent. So to the extent you want to have some specific inputs for the transparency aspect, and obviously I know a lot of you do, please reach out to Jacob directly. Mr. Bartlett.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I thought that where we'd ended up on that was, yes, that there was going to be I thought it was Jacob and others were going to develop a proposal that would come back so that the rest of us could reflect on it. It would be better if OPC participated in that process so that we don't have two. We can have one that has been hammered out a little bit, and then we can potentially make a decision. I thought on the sensitivities thing, I think, Eli, it was what you guys were using terminology that really equated to scenarios, and I thought that we actually did agree on the notion of at least the low case scenario, which is sort of business as usual, and the other one, which is achievement of the CSNA goals. There was some discussion at one point about a third scenario that went beyond that. So
I've got a note something about box one. So, but again, I'll go back and look.
But I think if we can nail that, that would be helpful. Because you defined, I thought, those ranges appropriately. So, and I'm just wondering on some of the other pieces, if the same approach that we're talking about for transparency or participation could be like, are there folks that would be willing to take the different versions of something that were put on the table and that we talked about, and try to put together a proposal that a single proposal that we could look at, so that we have something that maybe we can come to closure on? That would be helpful. For example, the grid management piece.
Right.
Anyone take that one?
I think that would be helpful. And I guess my thought would be, folks will have discussions with Jacob, and maybe Jacob, you recirculate whatever you come up with, or whatever utilities, I guess, more granular position on that is. circulate it to the group, and then if you let me know or let the stakeholders know it's been circulated, and then we can figure out if everyone's on board with it, or if if Eli wants to submit kind of a different approach to it.
Sure.
Does that sound acceptable?
Sure.
Okay. All right. It might be easier rather than having cross transparency proposals. All right. So we're going to come back to boxes 3 and 4. Big question. Do we want to meet next Thursday? With the understanding that we probably won't be able to meet until the 11th of January at the earliest, given the technical conference. And my guess is we're probably going to have a lot of stuff to talk about, stemming from the technical conference as well.
Just to note, the other PC44 interconnection working group led by John Borkowski is meeting from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern time on Thursday, the 21st.
Okay.
So yeah, I just wanted to flag that.
Yeah. I certainly don't want to double book people, because I know a lot of you are in multiple work groups, where I fortunately am only in one. I'm happy to meet in the morning if we think it's worth it to do so. But again, I don't want to waste people's time, because I know how valuable it is. But if we want to have a meeting from 10 to 12, we can do that. And just assuming the folks that have to do the follow-ups are going to be ready to do that and ready to discuss those outstanding items.
I personally think it would be a real holiday gift if we could do what Ethan says and put a bow on some of these things.
Okay. So the Christmas gift or the holiday gift is not to meet, but actually to meet. It was actually finish things, and that's fine. We can hope for a Festivus miracle. Yeah, I'm fine. So why don't we do that? Jacob, is it doable for the items, transparency aside, for you guys to follow up on a few of the issues that
we can work towards? I don't know, vacation wise, who's in and who's out started next week, right? So that may be a challenge, but we can work towards trying to bring some of those comments next week.
Right. And to the extent you can, go back and look at the first set of comments, obviously Mr. Berchinski's and also OPC's, if you guys want to respond to those directly to the extent you haven't done so already. And I'll go back and look at some of those written comments. Too much to ask for any kind of written comments to be submitted by the 19th, Tuesday.
And these would mostly just be like reply comments related to boxes 3 and 4. You're thinking?
Yep. That's what I'm thinking.
I think we can aim for that.
Okay, that's fair.
Maybe morning of the 20th, but definitely can work towards that.
Fair enough. Okay, so any kind of reply comments, the stuff we've talked about today, items that you want to have addressed that haven't been addressed, try and circulate those by the 19th. And yes, sir.
Judge McLean, I would be remiss if I didn't just throw this one out there, right? As most of you all are aware, the commissioner's responses from an MYP for BG comes out today, right? And this team is going to be extremely busy on the BG side. I know I keep asking for some lifelines, right? But I do ask for these things because I'm the one that's working with the team and really recognizing the strain that's being pulled on multiple directions. And Eli likes to send data requests over to us too. That keeps us very busy. He's looking to the other side like he doesn't know I'm talking about him, right? But You know, I'm just, you know, with that, I understand that we're trying to do stuff here, but in light of all the other stuff that's going on over the next 2 weeks and holidays and stuff, just curious if we can revisit some of these timelines and some of these responses. I don't know around anyone else, but I'll tell you all, what's coming out to us today is gonna keep us super busy on the planning side.
No, I get it. And I mean, I'm hoping this would be obviously there's an interconnection work group meeting as well. I'm hoping 10 to 12, and like Mr. Bartlett indicated, you know, maybe we can put a bow on this stuff rather than having to go back on. Again, we're not going to be able to meet for almost a month. We're going to have to try and remember all this stuff. You know, the stuff's hopefully just be a little, you know, relatively fresh in our minds rather than having to wait till the 11th. But I do understand and appreciate your position. But hopefully Jacob, with the little, he's got a little PHI next to his name, he can carry the brunt of it. Eli, you have anything to add, sir?
No, that's fine. We're flexible on next meeting.
Great.
Honestly, don't feel strongly either way on the like stakeholder engagement process piece. As I mentioned, we've just been thinking about it, and we've been starting to jot some ideas and thoughts down. I think that's something we could concretely be ready to discuss in early January.
Sure.
So happy to do that, and happy to work with Jacob and the utility folks to try to align on those processes as much as possible.
Excellent.
No strong feelings towards.
Yeah, and again, I know the transparency, that one's not going to come like that, and it's something that is an ongoing process. Mr. Bartlett, did you have anything to add, sir? No. Okay. All right. So we'll plan for a short meeting. Hopefully we can tie some of these up. I will try and put something together on my end so folks kind of know where we stand on certain things, and you know, to the extent we need to hone the recommendations on areas of non-consensus. Hopefully we can do that. And with that, I will see everyone who's not reading the BGE decision here next week. Okay.
Thanks, Judge. Thanks,
All right,
everyone.
Thank you. Enjoy
Thanks
your
so much.
weekend.
Appreciate it.